when we suppress this and inhibit this individually, medically and culturally, it's not just that we're missing out on something positive that we could be using. It's that it actually contributes to our inability to heal and resolve trauma, because that shaking and trembling is the pathway that our human organism has evolved, like all mammals, to resolve trauma, to release the tension and bracing, to let go of the immobility response, to down-regulate the autonomic nervous system and bring the body back to its healthy pulsation. So when we suppress and inhibit it, I described it's a little bit like we're cordoning off or we're locking the emergency exit.
You've probably felt it before, your hands trembling before a big presentation, your legs shaking after a shock, and that sudden quiver that you try to hide. We're taught to control it, to hold it together, but what if that shaking wasn't weakness? What if it was wisdom? Today on the One Thing podcast, we're joined by Richmond Heath, founder of TRE Australia, a physiotherapist who discovered that the body's natural tremor response might be the missing link in how we recover from stress and trauma. We'll explore how this simple, involuntary reflex can be addressed with exercises known as tension and trauma releasing exercises, or TRE. This technique helps release chronic tension, reset the nervous system, and reconnect us with the part of healing we've been culturally trained to suppress. From war zones to bushfire recovery efforts, Richmond's work shows how our body already knows how to recover. We just have to get out of the way. So whether you're curious about trauma, science, mind-body connection, or just looking for a practical way to calm your nervous system after a long day, this conversation might change how you see your own body. I'm Dr. Adam Rinde, and this is the One Thing podcast, where we uncover the single insight that changes everything. At the end of the episode, you'll hear some commentary from me. I encourage you to listen into that, where I give my own personal views and discussion on the episode. So without further ado, welcome to the One Thing podcast. Richmond, welcome to the One Thing podcast. It's so great to be here with you today.
Good on you. Thanks for having me, Adam.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, I know we have a lot to get through today, and I just wanted to get started really because it's such a fascinating topic. And your career has been built around something that most people just instinctively suppress in their bodies, which is shaking. When you first started reflecting on shaking, what in that response made you think that this has to do with trauma or trauma recovery?
Yeah, so my background as an integrative physiotherapist, I'd been taught, like everybody else, shaking if you're at the gym is weakness and a lack of control or fatigue, or if you're public speaking and your hands are shaking, that's just anxiety. So we grow up in a Western culture that completely pathologizes it. And the main experience for me, Adam, was I was given a DVD by a friend, a chiropractor friend of mine. He said, "Here, check this out, it's really cool." And so I went through these TRE exercises one night. I lay on the floor. I had this tiny little vibration in my inner legs from the exercises, like no big shaking like you often see online, just tiny little vibration. I didn't think much of it. So I went to bed, and then the next morning when I woke up, I was like, oh my God, what happened? I just slept like I hadn't slept in 30 years. I didn't dream. My body was heavy, and I remember when I went and sat on the toilet, and normally in the mornings, because of my chronic tension patterns in my body, I would have my heels off the ground, a little bit like you see with kids who are a bit autistic. You know, you've got that tension pattern in my calves. And I'd had chronic Achilles problems for 15 years that I'd done everything trying to treat, and I couldn't run because of that. I had all these difficulties. And I'll never forget sitting on the floor and just thinking, oh my God, what is going on? It felt like my heels were about a foot below the floor because all that tension in my calves that I'd had for probably since I was a child had fallen away. And so in that moment, I knew that this shaking had done something completely different to everything else that I'd tried. And I'd tried everything, not diet, I would add in at that stage, but I'd tried all sorts of treatments. And so I knew in that moment it was doing something. Now, at that stage, I didn't have a story or an understanding about the trauma and the tension patterns in my body. I didn't understand any of that. And that was really what TRE gave me, was over the next sort of the last 15 years, I've been fully immersed full-time doing it. And it gave me a model for understanding where this tension was coming from, that it wasn't just mechanical, it wasn't just stress, but it was these unresolved patterns that I'd been carrying in my body for, literally probably my whole lifetime, but chronic pain for 10 or 15 years without really understanding why and without being able to address it.
And so did you start in your own clinical practice looking for this and approaching patients differently from that point on?
Yeah, I did. So at the time, I was working as a physio, but mainly, and my other background is in Bowen therapy, so I was doing a little bit of that, but I was mainly teaching Pilates. And so what happened was I'd been teaching that full time for about 5 years. And what I started to do is exactly what you're saying, was I was noticing people's bodies shaking during Pilates. Now, for the previous 5 years, I'd just been telling them to control it and keep going. And so then I did make a little shift because I'd started doing TRE training and understanding it. And I'd be like, once I saw that shaking, I was like, don't move, stay there. That's where the magic is. You're going to get more value out of letting your body shake and tremble and reorganize itself subconsciously. And then we can come back and do the conscious volitional exercises later. So it really transformed my whole worldview about what I was doing. Everything I'd learned about strength and flexibility, it began to evolve. And a key book for me, if there's listeners out there who are, primarily if you're a health therapist, the key sort of paradigm changing book for me was The Body Bears the Burden by Dr. Robert Scaya. I remember when I left the physio clinic and went off to do TRE full time, I bought them a copy. I was like, you guys, you all have to read this, because it gave me a trauma-informed understanding of all these sort of conditions that normally in a physiotherapy clinic we'd be saying a biomechanical, maybe stress might be included, but all of a sudden I had an understanding of what was really going on.
Is there a certain trauma, is there a certain type of tremor that you'll see that's typical and then some that are atypical? Like, can you give us the range of what this looks like?
Yeah, so look, many people listening, or just about all of us listening, will have experienced spontaneous shaking and trembling at some time in our lives. As a little kid, when you're presenting at school and your hands are shaking, or public speaking, tremor in the voice, or maybe people have had a car accident or a significant shock and the body's trembling, or you've come across someone, the body's shaking and trembling. When we deliberately invoke this with TRE, there are common patterns, and often it is just a shaking and a trembling or a vibratory sort of movement, and that could be just in the legs initially, but ultimately the whole body will generally want to become involved as it reawakens itself. Literally, it starts to vibrate and pulsate itself back to life after years of chronic tension. So the vast majority of people will experience shaking or vibration, or their legs flapping around if you're lying on the floor. But also the body will often go into what we call pandiculation, which is like when we yawn and the body naturally, organically stretches itself while it's being contracted, the muscles are contracted, which is a way that the nervous system resets the neuromuscular system. And that will also often happen as well. So sometimes people will move from shaking and trembling to their body starting to spontaneously move and stretch, and when that happens, it feels amazing.
That's amazing. I want to circle back to that again, but really want to get into TRE and what that actually means, and talking about the sessions and what they look like when you take people through a TRE session.
Yeah. So originally TRE stood for trauma release exercises, and it was developed by David Berceli, as an American guy who was seen shaking and trembling in the context of war zones and natural disasters. But when he went back home to the US and he was sharing it with people who didn't have, quote, capital T life and death trauma, they were reporting things like, oh, my neck pain's falling away, my digestion's better, I'm feeling more calm, I'm sleeping better. And so then TRE started to stand for tension and trauma release exercises. What it looks like is we use simple muscle fatigue. So anyone who's ever lifted a weight or held a yoga pose for long will experience that sense of the body starting to shake or tremble. And all we do is, by reframing it as a positive recovery or reorganizational reflex, Rather than trying to stop it, we learn how to surrender and relax and let it start to build up. So commonly what it looks like is people are lying on the floor with their legs in like a diamond shape, like butterfly position. We lift the legs up, we hold them there until you start to get a little shake, and then we go from there. And invariably what will happen is the legs will start shaking, but any part of the body could start to tremble. Someone's hands or fingers might start to jump around. Their eyes might, or their eyelids might flutter. And then we teach people how to stop the tremors, because the movements we're talking about, it's not like consciously shaking your body. It's the body starts to generate the shake itself. So we tend to call it neurogenic, just meaning that the nervous system's generating the movement. I'm not generating it consciously. And one of the key elements of TRE then, of course, is teaching people how to self-regulate it. So pretty quickly, you slide your legs out, take the muscles offload, the tremors stop. So you have a sense of empowerment and control that you can surrender and let go as much as feels comfortable for you. But if at any point it doesn't feel comfortable, you can just stop the movements. And that's a real key around TRE that brings it into this real trauma-informed space. And it's been designed to empower people, because one of David's key insights was going, if we've had a tsunami that's just hit and it's 200,000 people in 13, 15 countries that have been devastated, we can't use the classic Western therapy model of let's bring in a whole lot of therapists and do 15 sessions over the next 6 months. We have to find ways to empower people in their own healing. And that was really the impulse for zoning in on this shaking reflex, recognizing what it was doing in all mammals. Like anyone who's got an animal like a dog will see it shaking in a thunderstorm, or if you remember picking up a rabbit or a hamster as a child and it's vibrating. And so he recognized the innate sort of healing potential of this shaking reflex, rather than it being a pathological thing, which most of us, as you say at the start of the show, most of us have just learned to inhibit it. And if we've had a car accident, we're shaking, we're like, oh, people are going to give us blankets and we're going to try and stop that because we think it's shock. But it's nothing to do with shock. It's not part of anxiety. It's not to do with adrenaline. The adrenaline doesn't cause shaking. The adrenaline fuels the body with energy for the fight or flight response. The shaking is how the body uses up the adrenaline to get us back to homeostasis.
Wow. So do we know the mechanism of that? Like what you're activating, releasing, and wiring? So you're saying that the stress response or the acute event releases adrenaline, and the adrenaline via the shaking is a homeostatic response. Where's that coming from? Do we know where in the brain that's...
Yeah, look, so because this has been completely pathologized for the last 100 years in Western science, it hasn't really been well researched, because shaking and trembling has only ever really been studied up until the last 10 or 15 years, primarily studied as a pathological thing, an event like Parkinson's or epileptic seizures. So without going into too much detail, the shaking and the tremoring is coming out of what we would call a subcortical or a subconscious part of the brain. So it's not our prefrontal cortex. It's not a conscious movement. It's more coming out of the brainstem and the autonomic nervous system. But it also includes things like spinal reflexes, where the nerves between the limbs and the spine have their own little movement. They're called central generation patterns. So basically, the key thing that we need to understand is it's not a conscious process. It's like subcortical. It's deeper in the brainstem. And it's also, most of your listeners will understand a little bit about the neurobiology, is it's not necessarily linked to the limbic system. So that what we'll often find is that even people who've had significant major trauma will have shaking and trembling, and it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the emotional centers of the brain, or even the cognitive part, where there may or may not be a story. And sometimes people will tremor and they may find their body wanting to have a release of the diaphragm, which we call crying, or even laughing spontaneously. But one of the beauties of this process is we get to bypass our conscious mind and our ego, so we let the body take the lead. So for want of a better word, we say it's the autonomic nervous system has this inbuilt recovery reflex. And that's really the second half of the stress and trauma cycle. So in our Western world, there's been huge research into how the body responds to stress and trauma. But then we stop because then we go, now we need to do cognitively based therapy or talk therapy or consciously directed processes, which have a certain amount of value. But because the shaking is pathologized still, so if you're a military veteran and you come back from service, or you've been back from service and your hands are shaking, you might get medicated. Or commonly, if women are shaking after birth, they'll be going, here's a blanket, this must be a sign of coldness and that sort of thing. So it's still in its infancy in terms of understanding the mechanism. So it's relatively new in a Western scientific space, but it's also, this shaking reflex has been described as the oldest medicine on earth because mammals naturally have it and humans all around the globe have been using it for millennia. It's only that it seems relatively new in a Western medical sense where we've pathologized it and misunderstood it for decades.
Amazing. Yeah. I think the first time I heard about it, and I don't know if this is properly attributed to the right person, but was Peter Levine was saying that animals go behind a rock or into some type of cave after a traumatic experience and just shake. And he was giving some examples, and I just thought, wow, that really spells out, like you're saying, how we want to stop that as soon as possible. I mean, that's been the conclusion, but you're bringing forth this important aspect of how it is part 2 of that healing response.
That's right. That's the key thing, is separating it out and recognizing that the shaking is not helping the body to fight or flee, and it's not helping the body to freeze. It's not part of the stress or the trauma response. It's the second half, as you say, the completion or the recovery response. And Peter Levine's, his sort of seminal first book was called Waking the Tiger, where that was his introduction to it. David Berceli was on a sort of different parallel path there. And the key thing around the TRE element was about finding ways to empower people so that it wasn't only being used in a therapeutic setting. And because it's really like a birthright knowledge that we should all know about. But from a young age, when I first learnt TRE, Adam, I'd be reading to my kids, and every second kid's book would have something like, the ugly duckling was trembling with fear. So from a young age in our Western culture, we associate it with it's fear, it's anxiety. We go, why am I shaking while I'm public speaking? Oh, it's because I'm anxious. And we stop there. We don't ask the question, what is the shaking trying to achieve? And when we do that, we're going, oh, okay, right, it's not helping me fight or flee or freeze. So it's not part of that. And then it becomes obvious. And here's the really significant point, Adam, is when we suppress this and inhibit this individually, medically and culturally, it's not just that we're missing out on something positive that we could be using. It's that it actually contributes to our inability to heal and resolve trauma, because that shaking and trembling is the pathway that our human organism has evolved, like all mammals, to resolve trauma, to release the tension and bracing, to let go of the immobility response, to down-regulate the autonomic nervous system and bring the body back to its healthy pulsation. So when we suppress and inhibit it, I described it's a little bit like we're cordoning off or we're locking the emergency exit. And that's one of the reasons why, as good as our current existing therapies for post-traumatic stress are, only about 1/3 of people will get a full recovery and the other 2/3 will have little or no effect at all. Yeah. And that's because this body-based recovery is the element that's been missing, and finding ways to address the underlying neurobiology of unresolved stress and trauma. And this is where the organism already has this pathway in there to resolve it.
So is TRE more of a corrective experience than from the original trauma pattern? Like, because you're essentially, that moment isn't happening during a TRE session. It reminds me of repairing a chronic injury. It's like, are you going into old patterns and unstucking those?
Yeah, so again, part of the beauty of this is we don't need to go into the story or the narrative or know exactly what happened. And it's also important to recognize that for most of us, any stress and trauma in our body before the age of 2 or 3, we're never going to have a story. We're never going to consciously remember it unless you're doing some kind of altered breathing states or psychedelics and that sort of thing, where you might get that subconscious memory. So this is part of the element where in TRE, one of our sayings is in TRE, the tremors are the therapist. So the body gets to decide what it works on. So rather than, I might consciously lie down and go, hey, I want to release that car accident or that abuse or whatever. And we can work with it that way therapeutically, where you're thinking about particular things. But the real magic, and if we're all sitting here listening to this podcast at the moment, is our bodies are all carrying unresolved stress and tension, chronic immobility, areas of the body that we're not even aware of, areas of pain we might notice, but there's areas of tension that we don't feel until we stretch them or someone does a trigger point or a massage. And so in this sense, it's important to recognize, and I always use the sort of metaphor that stress and trauma are verbs. It's not something that happened to me back then and it's stuck inside the body. It's that my body is currently activating that pattern, that protective pattern, the freeze response, the tight shoulders, the digestive system that's not working, the autonomic nervous system on high alert so I can't sleep, my racing mind. And so in tremoring, what we're doing is we let the body determine what it lets go of and where. So I might lie down and think I want it to release my right shoulder tension, but there's something happening in my left ankle or in my pelvic floor or in my digestive system that the body wants to work on. So in that sense, it's more generic, and we let the body lead the process, because literally every time you invoke that shaking or tremoring response, your body will just start to find and unwind another layer of unresolved tension and trauma in the body.
So I'd love to hear about the work you've done, some of the outreach you've done with larger communities and populations. And I've heard about your work with the Ukraine, and I'd really love to hear how that work came to be and some of the outcomes and experiences you had with helping people in the Ukraine.
So middle of last year, I was contacted by a group called the Complex Trauma Institute, which is a sort of non-profit collective of therapists based out of the UK primarily, who do work around the world. And what we did was 3 online Zoom sessions. So they're about 90-minute classes, and we had more than 400 people on those classes. So it was like a 3-week series, and it was all run through translators as well. And the beautiful thing here was we've got 400 people there who, and some of them were going, they're dropping out of the Zoom call because the power's going off because they're being bombed in real time. So this is this is right at the coalface. And by the end of that 3 weeks, all of those people have got access to this shaking and trembling process that they can then use on their own. And that's what I'm really passionate about this, Adam. Like when I first brought David Berselli out to Australia, not long after that, we had massive big bushfires here in Victoria where I live, with a couple of hundred people passed away. So there was just mass stress and trauma through a whole community. And I'll never forget this was one of the first group classes that I ran, was up in Kinglake, where the worst of the fires and the devastation was. And sometimes afterwards, I was running a class with about 30, 35. They were all sort of recovery workers and trauma counsellors there. And we had, the only venue that was available was the local pub, like a bar. And I'll never forget, at the end of a tremoring session, after about 30 minutes or so, and this is the beauty, it's not like mindfulness or exercise or where it takes time to develop the skills, because it's already in our autonomic nervous system, the effects are instant. And I'll never forget just looking across this room and first of all thinking, how weird is this? It's the middle of the day and I've got 30 people and they're all basically almost asleep on the floor of a pub. But the instant changes, the level of relaxation, people's breath just slow and relaxed. It's like being in a room with 30 people almost asleep. The level of peace, it was just so profound in that moment. Now, at the end of that session, they were all going to get back up and go out into this sort of trauma zone. The instant effects of calming the system that's probably the most significant thing. And the fact that it's so empowering, that rather than you going, hey, you need to keep coming and seeing me all the time, is once people learn how to access this, you've got it for life. You could be lying in bed, unable to get to sleep. You bring your legs up, you bring your tremor on, it's going to help switch your brain off and get you to sleep. Or maybe first thing in the morning or at the end of a stressful day at work. So that instant physiological change, it's like literally finding the off switch that most of us can't find. Because let's face it, if we could just consciously choose to relax, we would all relax, we'd all let go, we'd let go of all our trauma and we'd all be healed and we'd be fine. But we can't. And that's where this inbuilt innate reflex, which is really genetically encoded in us, is so valuable because it has instant, immediate effects as soon as we learn to access it and allow it.
I'm interrupting this program just with a quick break to talk about something that can truly make a difference in your daily life. That's the Pulsetto device. The One Thing podcast has teamed up with them as an affiliate sponsor, and I'm excited to share some information about them, and then we'll get right back to the program. We all face stress, restless nights, and those moments of anxiety, but what if there is a simple way to find more calm and happiness? That is where Pulsetto comes in. If you've listened to this podcast or followed my blog or writing, you'll know that I'm a big advocate for the vagus nerve balance, vagus nerve stim, and training heart rate variability. That's where Pulsetto comes in. It's a vagus nerve stimulation device, and I've been so impressed with what they're doing, and the results speak for themselves. Imagine these results: 28% less stress levels, an 18% improvement in sleep quality, a 26% reduction in anxiety, a 22% happiness boost, and also 86% of their users felt calmer and less stressed after using it. Those are real life benefits, and it's drug-free. If you're looking to improve your well-being and find a greater sense of calm, I encourage you to check out Pulsetto. If you enter the discount code ONETHING on your purchase, it will give you a 10% discount. The link to Pulsetto is in the show notes. By doing this, not only will you improve your health, but you'll also support the podcast. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And now back to the program.
Amazing. So I guess some people listening might be thinking about the complexity that they've been told that's involved with trauma healing. And this seems like has such an innate simplicity to it. How do you navigate that when there's like resistance between people feeling like this just seems so simple, and here I am doing all these different modalities for the trauma?
Yeah, look, and it is a challenge. And one thing I would say is it doesn't necessarily negate, and it doesn't mean that you don't do all those other things. It's something that's going to support and enhance all of those other processes because it's working with the foundational level of regulation in our nervous system. And you're going to get more access to your prefrontal cortex so that cognitive behavioral therapies are going to work better. If you're doing yoga, Pilates, somatic experience, anything else you're doing, when you integrate this tremoring reflex, it's going to help shift your baseline state. So those things are more efficient and effective. And it's not a silver bullet. It's not like saying, oh, go and tremor and then all of a sudden everything is magically healed. But it's a process that's going to keep shifting your nervous system into a more organized, down-regulated state every single time and start to unwind your body and your physiology and those chronic tension and pattern pain. So for me, I liken it a little bit to like first aid, where, 90% of the problems, 90% of the time, it's going to help. But you still may need to go, hey, I need to go and see my psychotherapist or my psychiatrist and all that sort of stuff with like surgery. But it's something that complements and enhances all of those other things we do. And for many people, that is part of the magic of it, is it's like, wow. And it is that simple in terms of how to use the tremor mechanism. It doesn't mean that, life becomes simple or trauma's all magically gone, but it gives us this avenue and this pathway to be able to reconnect to some peace inside us. And a key thing is, for me, Adam, is a lot of in our Western sort of world where we're very ego-driven, is this sense of, I need to fix my trauma. I need to heal my trauma. I need to make it happen. That was what was for me is 30 years as a physio with all my chronic injuries. It's like, it's up to me to fix this and to change how I move. And there's an element of that. But the greatest relief for me when I first experienced this trembling mechanism was this sense of, hang on, there's something inside me that's got nothing to do with me that can actually help heal this even better than I can when I simply get out of the way.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly empowering process that's going to help support everything else that we're doing. It doesn't replace it.
Amazing. So other movement disorder conditions like MS, dystonia, Parkinson's disease, what have you seen with the use and application in those conditions?
Yeah. So those movement disorders are different. There is a pathological difference to them, whereas this tremor response is not a pathological response. And commonly what we see is it will help often reduce, and this is only anecdotally, there hasn't been any studies on these sort of things, particularly, although in MS there has been some initial sort of research, it will generally help to reduce the symptoms a little bit. So the classic one is people with Parkinson's. When they do TRE and they experience the shaking and trembling, they'll be like, this is really obvious. This is a different sort of shake and tremor to what I experienced through my Parkinson's. And they will often then find a reduction in their Parkinson's tremor. Or similar with people with seizures, and a lot of people with seizures are like, oh my God, I'm going to have a seizure. It's a seizure. But very quickly they learn that it's not that at all. And commonly what we'll find is that there's a bit of a reduction in their seizures. Again, not a magic bullet, but over time it's something supportive, because what we tend to say in TRE is we're not treating anything. We're just helping your nervous system re-regulate. And from there, then everything else is, if your symptoms are stress related and we're reducing the stress in the system, it can reduce symptoms, but also starts to create the conditions for healing and strengthen that.
Amazing. I want to circle back to more about trauma in just a moment, but take a little bit of a detour here, because this also has been used related to like performance and flow state, like people who are trying to get into that optimal performance, whether they're an entertainer or athlete or public speaker or what have you. Can you talk about what the use and the application in these settings?
Yeah, so especially in sports settings, what people will often find is that when they use the tremoring after performance or training, they'll get a significant reduction in training soreness and they will recover much more quickly, which makes sense because it's driving the body into a parasympathetic recovery state. So people are using it for that sense of recovery, physical, mental health as well. But you mentioned one of the areas, and I find this really exciting, is around flow states. So, we all have those experiences, and not just the peak experiences where everything just seems to be flowing easily. All the traffic lights are green. Everything I do is working. But of all of us experience micro flow throughout the day. You're writing an email and you're in the zone and you forget about time, or I don't know, you could be doing the dishes or playing with your kids and time starts to change and things let go. And one of the key elements around flow is we fall into flow states. We don't consciously create them. We don't cognitively make ourselves be in the zone. It's something that we have to surrender into. And so in my experience, this practice of generally lying on the floor, although you can do it in standing and all sorts of different positions, this practice of learning how to let go and allow the body to shake and tremble and move us, and learning how for our ego to take a back seat and like come along for the ride, that really is the essence of what a flow state is, where if you're in a performance setting, you've practiced all your skills, and rather than cognitively trying to create them from the ego, they just naturally start to flow out of the body. So this TRE gives us a practice where we're literally in training ourselves and learning how to let go and surrender and let the body shake and tremble and move. And so it's one of the easiest ways of accessing and effectively practicing. It's like a non-practicing really, because you're not doing it, but you're just getting more and more entrained into this state of surrender. And where it's really magic then is in groups, large groups, team performances, workplaces, schools, any sort of setting like that, group musicians, because the spontaneous movements of the body in a group setting literally start to entrain the whole collective. I liken it a little bit to when you see a murmuration of birds and the birds are all moving together, because what happens is the coherence starts to happen at a physiological level. And it's always amazing when we run groups or live workshops where people come into the room, we don't know each other, everyone's a bit tense, everything's in their own space. And then after a tremor session, it's like people connect more deeply. They're more calm, more grounded, more open, and the whole group starts to fall into this resonance. So that's a huge area. It's really exciting area when you start to see groups of people relate and engage and move together more freely.
So great. Are there any dangers or contraindications to TRE?
Yeah, so we always kind of say there's no real contraindications because no matter who you are and what conditions you might have, if you're in a situation where a bomb goes off and you get a big shot of adrenaline, your body's still going to spontaneously shake and tremble. But when we're deliberately invoking it in this way, the real things, of course, is if you've got any major medical conditions, especially if exercise is dangerous for any reason, then we would generally say make sure you learn with a TRE provider or consult a medical professional. And then the other area is really around mental health, including extreme trauma. So if you're in such a dysregulated state that you can't manage yourself or your life or that sort of thing, then you may need to initially at least learn how to invoke the tremors in a therapeutic environment. But again, this is the vast majority of people, Adam, can learn it simply and easily on their own, even through an online course, without necessarily needing someone there with them. But if you've got any sort of extreme conditions, if someone's got an acute disorder where the flare-ups are overwhelming and they can't manage them, then those settings, recommended that you learn initially at least with a provider. But even then, because it's a natural reflex inside the body, it's not just a sort of different modality, it's something that's already organic in the system. If initially we need that help and support to learn it, then generally the vast majority of people pretty quickly learn how to just use it on their own.
So perhaps we can do a more practical application right now. Someone's listening to this and feels anxious or tightly wound, or maybe something acutely disturbing happened today where they felt that flight or flight response come on. What's a 2-minute practice of TRE that they could maybe try safely?
So I wouldn't give them a 2-minute practice of TRE because we wouldn't necessarily work it that way. But what I would say that is if someone's sitting there and you feel your body starting to shake and tremble and you feel comfortable, then you simply just let that start to shake and tremble. You just let that start to move. Knowing that at any point, if you need to stop it, it's a matter of just taking conscious control of the body. So the reason I wouldn't just say, hey, here, go and do this, is because most of us have got such a deep association with shaking and trembling being out of control and scary and wrong and dangerous that we associate it with something dangerous when it's not necessarily dangerous at all. So what we would generally do is say to people, rather than just, go and start shaking or do this, is guiding people how to learn how to have a safe and controlled experience of surrendering to the shaking. This is with TRE, like using muscle fatigue to bring the shaking on. But at the same time, learning, okay, now as soon as you get a little shake, stop it, take control. So people quickly learn, hey, it's like driving a car. I can accelerate, but I can also put my foot on the brakes. It doesn't take much, but I would tend to recommend that because if someone starts to shake and they're like, oh my God, I feel out of control, then they get scared. And the scared feeling is what generates more shaking. And so they can get themselves into a loop and it's like, it doesn't feel safe. But in a guided session, whether that's, if people do feel like, I'm interested, but I feel a bit nervous, then it's great. Find a TRE provider. They're in about 80 countries around the world. You can find them on the website traumaprevention.com, so you can get that help and support. Or otherwise, during COVID, and this was one of the positives for us in our community out of COVID, is we started teaching it online and creating online resources for people. So you can learn if you've had that experience of, wow, this is safe, because you've got to reframe it. If you've spent 50 years thinking shaking is fear and shaking is dangerous and it's out of control, then you do need to reframe it both intellectually, but more importantly, have that embodied experience of like, hey, I did the tremoring through TRE, it was safe, and then the fear's gone.
Yeah.
And that makes a significant difference.
So what's the range of emotions and experiences people have if they're in this state? Is there like screaming, crying, yelling, anger? What's the full experience?
Again, this is one of the beauties, is it's not a cathartic screaming, shouting, remembering, reliving the trauma experience at all. And in the vast majority of people will have no emotional content and no necessary narrative. What often happens is after the tremoring, if they do have a story, the story will come back up or the memory will come up, but it's not necessarily associated with a big emotional response to it. So the vast majority of people very quickly will find that when you lie down and you start to tremor, that the process is very pleasurable. It's a great medical term, autotelic, which means that it is innately pleasurable. So it's not like, oh my God, I have to relive my trauma, I have to do this. The body just starts to create more freedom and relaxation and flow. So it's not about going, oh, I have to remember this, or I have to express the anger, or I have to express my terror. Those sort of behavioral expressions, in my opinion, they only happen when this, what we call the neurogenic pathway, has been blocked. And this is where animal research, Adam, talks about this sense that the body shakes and trembles is a much more energy efficient and safer way to get back to homeostasis. Mm-hmm. I explain it like this. If a zebra gets caught by a lion and it's held in the lion's jaws for half an hour and then something happens and it escapes, and there's an amazing video of an impala being caught by a cheetah. When that zebra escapes, it doesn't go back. First thing is, it doesn't go back to the waterhole and start talking to all its friends about what happened for the next 15 years. Sure, we're different as humans. We have a different psyche and a brain and an ego, so we may need to. But it also doesn't go back there and then start to act out what it needed to do. It doesn't kick for the next half an hour because really it wanted to kick. The body shakes and trembles because that's a much more energy conserving and energy efficient way to dissipate the adrenaline and get back to a safe and calm state. So what I'm saying here to people is we often think that the way to healing, or if I've got anger or unresolved tremor or trauma or unresolved fear, I've got to act that out. I've got to behave it and express it emotionally. Whereas what I'm proposing to you is that the emotional expression only happens if that neurogenic or that spontaneous shaking and trembling pathway is not available, because it's a safer, easier, more efficient way. And so what that means is we don't necessarily have to relive the events. We're just looking for the organism to let go of that protective pattern that it's been carrying ever since the event.
Wow. So let's say that the paradigm shifted and TRE was seen as almost a prescription from doctors and psychotherapists and psychiatrists. What changes do you think would happen in our health and just like in the medical system?
Yeah, let me take it out of the medical field first of all. So my vision and my dream is that what will happen is that in schools, in primary schools, as part of our general learning about the human organism, children will know that shaking and trembling is normally healthy and it's a recovery response. So what it will look like is from the very first years of school, if someone's hands are shaking while they're speaking to their class or presenting their poem or their drawing, that they will be taught and held, and it will be explained to them that this is a normal process. So rather than thinking about how do we prescribe it after the effect, after the illness, that from a younger age, it will just become a natural, normal part of our Western culture that kids use this tremoring mechanism to optimize their health and well-being. And that sounds like a bit of a major dream or a sort of a revolutionary vision. But in other cultures around the world, the most common one we know about, the Kalahari Bushmen, who call themselves the keepers of the In lots of cultures, this is built into traditional cultures where the shaking and trembling is not seen as weird or unusual or pathologized. And so that for me is the real change, is that you would see people, first of all, spontaneously shaking and welcoming that whenever or someone's having a car accident, or even first responders at the end of the day are lying on the floor shaking and trembling at the fire station or even out in the field. that it just becomes a normal part of our human life, in the same way that you see a dog shakes 10 times when it goes for a walk. It just becomes normal, rather than it being something that we're prescribing after the effect, after the incident or the trauma, or when we're already got all these chronic health conditions going on. And that will happen as well, but primarily that it's something that we're all just using routinely as a natural part of life to help prevent those conditions and to optimize our mental health and physical well-being.
Amazing. Wow. This has really changed me just talking with you. So this is really fascinating. I would love to hear how you're going about your work these days and what we can do to support your work and the things that you'd like people to connect with you about.
So I'm one of thousands of TRE providers all around the world in about 80 countries. And so since COVID, this was the real change. Up until COVID, we were only ever teaching TRE face-to-face. And part of the belief and the paradigm was, it's not safe if we're not in the room to make sure we keep you safe and all that sort of thing. So during COVID, when that all stopped, that I couldn't travel, I couldn't run around and do workshops, and a lot of us started teaching TRE online through live Zoom calls, and that worked beautifully. And obviously it's not the same as being face-to-face, but in terms of teaching people how to use it so you can take it away and use it on your own, that was brilliant. But I had a long period of unemployment, and I was lucky to have in Australia, we had some government funding for people who'd lost their employment. And so I wanted to contribute something back towards that. So I built the world's first online TRE course, and it was free during the COVID pandemic. And it's since had 14,000 people have learnt TRE through this online course. Very basic, filmed on my iPhone, edited by myself. So it's not like it's a great technological performance. But the course involves the basic sort of neurobiological, neuroscientific reframing of the tremor mechanism. It has got a bit of information about polyvagal theory so you understand. But more importantly, it's got guided sessions so that you can be guided through the tremoring, and then ongoing use instructions. If this happens, this is how you regulate it. So that's really the primary way at the moment for me. And again, this is my passion, is not about working in a therapeutic one-to-one setting, is empowering people, going, look, this skill, this reflex is already inside you. The cost of less than a therapy session, you've got this online course where you can learn it, and then you've got it for life. And that's the real magic. It's like you just keep activating the tremor mechanism, and your body will keep organising your wellness at deeper and deeper levels. So for people, if you're interested, the course is just at trecourse.com. That's the easiest way to find it, and that's the primary way that I'm looking to spread it, because there's billions of people on the planet. This is where technology is such a great way of empowering people with these simple, practical skills they can build into their lives.
Exactly. Great. Yeah, this has been really fascinating conversation. If you'd like to leave us with some closing thoughts, that would be wonderful. And I just want to thank you very much for being here.
Oh, look, thank you for the opportunity, Adam. It's great to be able to let people know. The closing thoughts, the first thing that comes to mind is, for anyone out there who's ever had a panic attack in their life, first of all, please start to considering it's not an attack. Consider it's not an attack, it's a discharge. When your body is shaking and trembling, if your body is shaking and trembling, it's over. Whatever you're worried about, the body is already into recovery mode. That shaking and trembling is a discharge, not an attack. And for many people, that alone is enough for them to unwind those patterns of chronic anxiety. Not to say we won't ever get panicked again, but instead of then going into a snowball of like, oh my God, this is all overwhelming. It's like, yep, I've just had a panic, something's triggered me. I'm shaking, it's over. I'm already in recovery mode. So for anyone like that, and otherwise, yeah, my only parting thing is I just encourage people to check out the online course and learn this technique, or find a provider, because it's a resource that's inside every single one of us. And the more we use it, and it just becomes part of our life, it will lead us on our journey back to health and wellness.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the more I'm learning about therapies where we are our own medicine, is the more I feel hope. Because there's always a new drug being invented and a new this and new that, but when people can tap into something that's innately medicinal that's inside them, it's just a whole different level of experience. So thank you for sharing this and all the work that you're doing. And I'm sure this is changing lives.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Great to be on.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I really enjoyed speaking with Richmond, and this was a very interesting insight that connected with other topics that I study in other interviews we've had, such as polyvagal theory and somatic response. What's interesting is I think it's important to know the delineation between big T trauma or single incident trauma versus chronic, complex post-traumatic stress disorders. And I go into this in detail in my show notes that are available for paid subscribers at adamrinde.substack.com. But briefly, I'd like to share that I went home and did some of these exercises after speaking with Richmond, and I was astounded by the amount of shaking and tremoring my body wanted to do when I allowed it to have that space. It's fascinating that this is something that we suppress, and if it was nurtured, perhaps a lot of tension patterns would let go. I'm thinking about these applications in various conditions, including fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. However, it's really profound to see the research they're doing in war-affected individuals, soldiers, and other situations where trauma is happened in an acute setting. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I do encourage people to explore shaking and tremoring as something to see, just as an experiment, to see how much you are doing suppression of these natural responses. And the safe thing about it is you can turn it off at any time. Normally, if feeling uncomfortable, unsafe, you can just consciously tell your body to stop. Other tremor disorders, that is not necessarily an option, but in this particular case, that is an option. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and please share this with anybody that you think might benefit, and please like and subscribe our podcast in your various players, and when you can, please support our affiliate sponsors. This will help us continue to grow and provide this excellent content for you. Thanks again, and see you next time.